how to conduct a compliant RN supervisory visit. And I will talk about service supervisory visits as well. But this is an area that has been receiving attention from the surveyors or the auditors. They've been noting that there's certain elements that have been missing, because this actually is a function of your nurses. But if you're the agency director, you need to oversee that just to be sure that all of the data is being captured. So that's why we're talking about RN supervisory visits, because sometimes things just go wrong. They may get missed or all the data is not collected. So supervisory visits are actually mandated in your North Carolina home care rules and regulations for whichever service you're covering, whether it's in-home aide or companion sitter. Actually, you are mandated to have a nurse go out for in-home aides every 90 days, and then it's a little bit different for the companion sitter. But it is a function of your rules and regulations. And what I prepared for you all today is straight from the policies. What they expect you to do, what the state expects you to do as far as compliance, is they expect you to follow what is in your policy. I cannot stress that enough. If you all would be sure to look at your policy and see what you have committed that you were going to do as an agency in the way of supervisory visits. Because when you were approved to be an agency, they actually looked at your rules and regulations, and they were sure, based on what you told them, that you would be following those guidelines, and that meant you would be compliant. So one thing I wanted to mention today, in my agency, I did not have a separate schedule for in-home aides and companion sitters. You can have a separate schedule because it's actually legal in the rules and regulations. So what I did was, the rules for the in-home aide are a little more strict than those for the companion sitter. So I didn't want to have to break those up and try to figure out which one was going to happen when. I just put them all on the strictest one, which is the in-home aide. So that means everybody received a visit every 90 days, and we looked at all the things that we should look at. So you can do that as well. I know you all have a lot of things to manage, so just kind of having that consistent will help you as an agency. And it's always good when you do more than what they're asking you to do. So let's talk about the RN supervisory visit. The RN supervisor is supposed to supervise, she supervises the aides in the home, the in-home aide, or if it's a service supervisor, they would supervise the companion sitter. There's things that are supposed to be done on that review. They should provide the client case review. Whatever data you collected on that client, the nurse is supposed to go in and review that on that 90-day visit. She's there to look at what the aide is doing, but also to look at that client to be sure, if you weren't there other than 90 days ago, there could be some things that have changed. Many times I would ask, which doctors have you been to recently? Are you on any new medications? Not that I did anything with medications, but it gave me as a nurse a good purview of what kinds of things were going on with them. Say they didn't have a cardiologist before, and they told me, well, last month I went to a cardiologist. I would want to know why, and make those notes on that client. As I said before, if it's in-home aide, it's every 90 days. And on one of those visits, every 90 days, the aide should be in the home providing care on at least one of those. So what I actually went there most of the time when my aides were there, but you don't want to do that every time, because sometimes you need to see that client when the aide is not there, because there may be some information that you get that you would not have gotten if the aide is there. And the way that I scheduled really didn't schedule my visits. If I knew my aide was there from 9 to 12 on Tuesdays, and I had the time and I wanted to stop by, I would go during that time. I did not feel the need to call, tell them I was coming, because my aide was there and that was her work hours. Now, if I stopped by that afternoon at 2:00, I would call the client, because I knew my aide wasn't there. That was their private time. And I would let them know I'd like to stop by. Many would say yes, and sometimes they may not even be home. You need to make sure, at least on one of those visits, that the aide is there providing care And that is something that's in your audit procedures. And if you want to have 3 visits with the aide there and 1 with them not being there, that's actually a good thing to do for you to gather information. I put this up here for service supervisor because some of your agencies are not in-home aide agencies. Some of you just have companion sitters. So you also have guidelines to visit at certain intervals, and it's different. On the very first slide I put up, I said if I had in-home aides and companion sitters, I would do them on the in-home aide schedule because I knew I was doing more than what was required. So for the service supervisor, if you have companion sitters, you just have to contact that client every 3 months. That can be a phone call. It can be however you want to do that, but make contact with that client. And then you need to go into the home and make a supervisory visit in the residence at least every 6 months. But if you're operating on the in-home aide schedule, you've been there twice already. Also, one of those 6-month visits, the companion sitter needs to be there providing services. So this one is a little bit more things to remember, but if you do the in-home aide schedule, you'll be fine. So what should you look at when you go into the home? We talked a little bit already about the client's general condition. You've seen that client 90 days ago. How do they look? What kind of doctor's appointments do they have? Has their condition changed? This is important because you may have that client noted as a limited assistance client, and their care level may have changed. And that may mean that you need to change the aide. So you do need to look at the client. What is the response to care since the last supervisory visit? Does it look like they're doing better? Are they maintaining? You want to be sure that the care that's being provided is actually helping the client. And I was really a stickler for looking at the condition of the home when I went there. You know, there's only so much you can do to clean up someone's home because a lot of elderly people, when they get a certain age, they like to have a lot of things on their side table or on their coffee table. They want to stay just right there in place. But as far as safety, you want to be sure that, you know, there's not the scatter rugs, all of those things that are safety issues that your aide should be paying attention to. But certainly when you go there for a visit, you should look at it. Have they had a change in their ability or inability to perform their ADLs? And that will go back to the client's condition. Were they able to put their clothes on when you were there 90 days ago and now they can't? It's not just that they can't zip up their clothes, but they're having trouble with that. So you would make a note of it. And tie all of those things back to the plan of care. Is the plan of care still what it was 90 days ago, or does it need to be changed? If you change it, does it mean you need to do something different with the person you have there providing care? And then is your staff doing something where they need more education? Or is there corrective action? Is there something that the client told you that's going on that you need to correct with your aide? But many times there's things that the clients may be doing or asking the aide to do that they shouldn't be doing, like washing everybody's clothes in the house or cooking a meal for everybody. And they really should just be cooking for that person. So if there's corrective action there, you need to do that. I found myself as a mediator between the client and the aides, and that's what you want to be if you're actually running an agency. There's times when your clients are not going to be doing the right thing. There's times when your aides are not going to. So you need to be sure that you see that they're fair with each other and that you stand right in the middle and that you don't go outside that because then they trust you when you have to make a correction. This is one that I had almost forgotten about, is that the client's rights that you all take out to the client on admission, you know, there's a full list of client rights. When you go in for that supervisory visit, you're supposed to check to be sure that that client's rights is somewhere in that home and that that client can access it. This came about maybe 6 or 7 years ago. I don't know if something happened and someone didn't know what their rights were, but I started on my visits, I would most of your clients have a folder that you left them. You know, sometimes they lose it, you can't find it. A good place to put that folder, and you, of course, the copy of the client's rights should be in there. And you check, have your nurse check for that client rights each time they go, because that is something that they really were on top of. So it's kind of difficult. And I always found that maybe in the living room, if there's like a side table that has a drawer, that's a good place. Places like that where people aren't going all the time, but just make sure it's in place. Documentation, documentation is always so important, because if it's not documented, then it was not done. So I want to go over the things that should be included in your documentation. The date of the visit. When did you visit? And on my supervisory visit forms, I had the time as well, time in and time out. If I got there at 10:02 and I was there till 11 or 10:35, I would put that time on there as well. But this is just the date has to be there. What are your findings? And that's going back to what was the client's condition? What was the aide's? How was her work performance? What did you find out about her? So all of those things should be on the form. The signature of the person performing the visit, that would be the RN, or if it's the service supervisor, it would be that person. And then in the past, it was not a requirement, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, that the client or the responsible person signed the form, but now they should. So what you want is a concise form that asks for all of these things so you don't miss it. There's a place for the RN to sign, there's a place for the client to sign, and make sure that form has a date. I was looking at some data from surveys and audits, and one of them said that the RN signed and the client signed, but they didn't put a date there. So that's kind of suspect. And as I said, I would put date and time. One other thing I wanted to mention before I close this out is those of you who have electronic systems where you record all of your data, you want to be sure that those electronic systems allow you to gather all the information that I just went over. Sometimes those systems don't have a place for everything, but as an agency owner and as an RN, you need to make sure that there's a place for you to document all of those things in your system so that if you get a survey, it's all present. As always, I wanted to let you all know I'm happy to provide this information, but before you change any of your rules and regulations, go to the governing authority to make sure that it's okay for you to make those changes and that they want you to do that. I try to make sure my information is valid, but just be sure that you double check before you make a major change in your agency.